said, that is Laura. This is Kyle. We're so glad you're with us. Laura, you don't look like you're in your same place. So tell me what's going on with this whole background 18th century painting behind you.
I am in Vegas. I'm in
Vegas.
Vegas because I did a video shoot for with a couple of women that we are all experts for Your Tango online, and we talked about love and dating and romance and sex. We covered it all. It was fun.
Did you? Well, congratulations. So was this going to be like on Tango? Are they going to air this online or what?
They are. They're going to air this online, and I'll make sure to share it with you and everybody else as soon as it's ready. It was a hoot. Let's just say that it was a hoot.
So we're going to talk a little bit tonight about something that I think that you're passionate about, particularly communication between couples. And this started, I guess, a post that I actually did last week that I entitled "The Two Words That Will Ruin or Destroy a Relationship," and I really talked about what those were. To kind of give you a little bit of context on kind of what this brought this about, I've never been a fan of couples counseling. If any therapist is listening to that, I may get shot, but I'm not. Half of my former marriage was spent in counseling and didn't work. And as I've reflected back on that over the years, there's a couple of reasons why. Most notably of which is, at least within my experience and those that I've shared with other people, there's a lot of competition, shall we say, where one person is trying to get themselves validated by the therapist over the other one. And so it just goes back and forth, this laundry list of reasons why the marriage is bad and why all of them are the other person's fault. And we're hoping that the therapist will say, you know what, you're absolutely right. John, you're a jerk. Why are you ruining the marriage for everybody? So I started with that. But anyway, before we get to really what I thought those two words were, as you framed your relationship post your marriage, and you're really looking at the relationship that you've had now with Drew that's going on over almost 5 years, have you created any communication boundaries, if you will, where you've said to yourself or you've had an agreement with him, when we run into issues, when we have arguments, or just when we communicate in general, these are things that we're going to stay away
One of them is name calling of any kind. And I don't even mean nasty names like trash mouth names. I mean, really, lie. You're a liar. You lie. You did. We don't go there. And one of the rules that I have asked for and that he's agreed to is that we give each other equal time. So when we run into a conflict, we get to the person who wants to talk, who initiates, gets to talk, but then the other person has to listen, and then the other person gets to also, get to share their side, so to speak. And if we get too heated, we have to walk away and come back another day.
So, okay. So, how do you... Who's the referee in that when things begin to get heated? Because obviously emotions are charged, and usually when there's emotions involved, our rational side just gets kicked to the curb. Who's the referee in that? When you realize that it's escalating, who is it that says, okay, is it you? Is it him? Is it a mutual agreement or what?
We both have the right. We've established that we both have the right to do that, especially if we feel ourselves getting out of control. The one thing that I'm hypersensitive to, which I communicated with him early on, is walking away. I don't mind saying we need to come back to this, but just walking out is a real trigger for me. I'm just really hypersensitive to that. So, if he says, I'm really, we need to come back to this, I need some time to think, I can't say to him, no, I want you to discuss it now. I can't go there. And those are the rules of engagement that we've created. And there's one other thing that I will mention that is something that we together have discussed that's off limits. And that is staying focused on the issue at hand and not bringing in all the other issues, like using the one at hand that opens the door to all of the other ones. That each one, if we feel needs to get addressed, we'll do them one at a time, but they all can't glom together into one big old issue.
So give me an example of what you're talking about. Like, give me a
Okay,
practical
so
example.
very simply, he comes to me and says, you did this and it really upset me. And I say, okay. And I start to give an explanation of, how I felt about it. And then he goes to, and when you do that, you always and starts to list all these other things, and that's like a no-no. That's a big time out. If you want to go back in time and discuss some other issue, that's okay. But right now, I want to stay focused on this one particular situation that you are bringing up, and we will follow that through to completion so that it doesn't. The chances are far lessened that it will come up in the future.
Did you feel, was this something that when you guys first got together, that you actually sat down intentionally and said, almost like, I hate to use this word, but it's really the most fitting one, almost like a business meeting, and really kind of laid out some of this stuff? Or was this just things that you picked up along the way?
Some are things that I picked up along the way because as I looked back over, my marriage and the way that we had conflict, one of the things that is really one of my biggest pet peeves is this circular arguments that go round and round and round and never, and tend to spiral so that in the end you have no freaking clue what the hell you were arguing about in the first place. So that's a real pet peeve of mine, staying really focused. But yes, I think probably, I don't want to put myself out there as being so like hyper actualized, but the truth of the matter is, each time that, as we got to know each other and had our very first conflicts, we kind of did postmortems, like in business, we
Sure.
sat down afterwards and said, this is where things went wrong. This is how we could probably move through conflict in the future in a much better way. So yeah, it was somewhat businesslike.
I wasn't a fan of the marriage counseling thing when my ex recommended that we do it. I kind of went in there kicking and screaming, and you can pretty much ascertain how successful a therapy session will be by the mood of the patient as they walk in the door. So, so for lack of it ended up going that way. However, one of the things that I noticed, as to your point, I did a postmortem on, that whole period, was somewhat mentioning what you had said earlier, where we bring other things in, and you made a statement a moment ago that really hits the nail on where I'm going with this. When I met the Queen and I realized that we had something extraordinary that could potentially happen, I created some boundaries for myself. And I think that you already know I'm a big believer in boundaries. I think that most relationships fail because there are none, under this guise of I want to be free and let them do whatever. What a load of garbage that is. One of the boundaries that I created within the conversation context is I would never use the words together, you never. You never do this. You never do that. And when you think about it for a moment, and you turn that gun around and you point it towards yourself, that's pretty tough, because when you break that down, it really looks like this. So if I go to the Queen and I say, you never such and such and so and so, or you never blah blah blah, by using the context of you, I've automatically put all of the guilt on her. In other words, I am not assuming any liability on my own at all. That's strike one. If you're going to be in a relationship where it's going to be us together and it's going to be unity, there's no such thing as you, right? You can't distinguish one from the other in that form of a context, okay? So, that's like leveling the gun right at the person's head before you ever say anything else. You. The next piece of it is never. And a lot of people will say, oh, okay, well, there's no absolutes. All right. And I get that piece of it. But I think it's a little bit different than that, though. If I go to her and say, you never, that means I'm not paying attention when she was.
Right.
And when she did, it didn't matter because all I'm focusing on is what she hasn't done.
Right.
I will tell you this. In 4 years, I've never said those two words to her. Now, I can't tell you that it has everything to do with why our relationship is where it is, but I can tell you now it has clearly helped with our communication.
I happen to agree with you, but there's one of those two words that I'm even more that's more gets on my nerve than anything else, and that's the you.
Okay.
Coming at someone with you did this or you never did that or any of those things is, I think we did discuss at one point on one of our episodes about the word curiosity. Mm-hmm. And I'll bring that word back into this because part of that is that when you start to say you immediately put someone on the defensive.
Sure,
and
absolutely.
They immediately begin to defend themselves without even absorbing, hearing,
You've closed yourself off to any conversation. Your mind is made up. I'm not changing it into discussion.
And they feel persecuted. And so, I try to always, and it's something my mother kind of bashed into my head, is try to come from the place of how you felt. And so I'll always, with Drew or with anyone, even my kids or anyone that I have conflict with, come from the place of, this is how I felt yesterday when we had this conversation, or last night. Let me explain to you how I observed the situation, mm-hmm. and we can discuss it. Because I don't like it when someone comes to me and says, you already, whatever comes after that, I know it's not going to be good, and I know I'm not going to be interested in it.
Well, you tune it out. You will assume that after the word you, 99% of the time, it's usually in a critical light from that point on, right?
Yeah, I fucked up in some way or another, and I'm going to hear exactly how I did that second. And I'm usually willing to accept, if you want to say to me, something that you did yesterday, or something that you said really upset me. I don't want to upset you. I don't upset anybody. So I'm willing to listen. But I would insert that there has to be a little curiosity in there as to if you did something, Kyle, perhaps I'd like to understand what drove you to say it rather than just accusing you of doing it.
I witnessed that dynamic of, pointing the gun at somebody else in the you never, you don't context, this absolute, if you will, all the time, right? And when you observe it from the outside looking in, it's even worse because you feel so sorry for the other person because you're just like, oh, God. I mean, that's the type of thing when you see that happening, you turn to the person and go, do you see how that she's talking to him that way or he's talking to her like that? But when we're in the middle of it, though, right, and the emotions are flying and things are going, crazy, we tend to forget that. All we're trying to do is we've been hurt. We've been, we've been damaged in some way, and our goal is to try to make the person feel just as bad as we are, or to explain to them why it's their fault, why I feel the way that I do.
Interesting is that people immediately jump to an argument rather than a conversation. And I think people forget that conflict in an intimate, loving relationship is an exchange. It's not it's not a I don't want to use the word monologue. But it's not chastising. It's not there to reprimand. Reprimand's the word I want to use. It's not a reprimand. It's a conversation. Well, otherwise, if you feel the need to reprimand the person you love, you got to rethink that.
Well, when you reprimand, obviously, right, you've shown I'm right and you're wrong. and now you
Correct.
should be punished for that.
Correct. Or immediately there's punishment that follows.
Right. Absolutely.
That's not good.
When I went back and when I thought about that, I really saw that, at least through the counseling anyway, right? I mean, and many of the commenters and the emails that I received kind of voiced the same thing, where I heard a lot of that, right? Let me tell you right now, I'm just going to make this statement, and I'm going to blanket it, and I don't care what other people think, all right? If your conversations with your spouse or your partner invariably begin with the words "you don't," "you never," you have a
And
problem.
Drew and I do have an agreement. I'll tell you, Kyle, we have an agreement. And the agreement is that as we come to the end of the exchange and the conversation, the conflict, whatever you want to call it, we check in with each other. It's, do you feel satisfied with this? Or, or is there more? Is there something further? Because one of his things, and I understand this, is, and if he, and both of us are good about assuming responsibility when it's, our turn to assume responsibility, is he doesn't want me to bring it up again. He doesn't want to hear 6 months ago. We never really, resolved that. He doesn't want to hear it. And I, I agree with him. So even if, we don't feel good yet, even if we're not ready for the makeup sex, we definitely check in with, I might not be there yet, but we check in with, are we satisfied with where we've come in the exchange? You have the right the next day to say, I thought that I was, but I'm not. Can we discuss something further? But, we have to be civilized here. When you love someone, and you have to be freaking civilized. Otherwise,
true, but love, unfortunately, is uncivilized sometimes. We make it very uncivilized.
people give themselves permission to be uncivilized, and they think that, that love is that way, right? We say that, love is tumultuous or love is passionate. I can be passionately, loving you up, but I can also be passionately furious with you. Bullshit. I call bullshit on that. I call, what? If you love someone, you have to be even more cautious about choosing how how you address things with them.
Final thoughts, Laura. So, I mean, obviously, we're not going to solve the communication crisis between couples in 20 minutes, right? But I thought that it was something that a lot of people had not thought about before. When you really take, and it's something so simple, something as simple as, what, when I have a conversation, I'm never going to use the words "you never," "you don't," those negative absolutes, right? Where I am putting all the blame on someone else, or I'm refusing to pay any attention whatsoever to the things that the individual has done right, because I'm just going to focus on everything that they've done wrong.
Right. Which is our natural inclination, and I get that. We all have that natural inclination. But here's the thing. You brought up a really good point. We always say think before you speak. This is, what we're saying here is choose your words carefully when you do decide to speak. And, how do you open these conversations? And the other thing I would throw out is don't do it when when something just immediately happened and you're like stunned or like you just reacted like, how the hell could he have done or said something like that? That's not the moment to get into it.
Strategic. We have to be strategic about that.
We do. We have to. I'll get really quiet. Drew will always know when I am thinking about the fact that I'm going to need to discuss something with him, because he's like, oh, you're really quiet. And I'll just say, what? I'm thinking. I'm just thinking. I'm okay. I'm just thinking. And then in a time when we cool off, or I cool off just a little bit, then it's, I'd like to talk to you about something.
Kind of just going back for a moment, leaving the name calling out of it, right?
Yep.
I agree with that, right? There's no sense in calling, calling them bad names or the liars or whatever, because really at that point, you stop making it about the issue and you're beginning to make it personal. And listen,
yeah,
I've been in leadership positions in organizations for years, and I've taken management classes and leadership classes. When you're having a conflict with someone, never make it about the person. Always keep it about the issue. Same situation here within relationships, right? If she did something wrong, okay, she made a mistake. fair enough. Okay, now that doesn't mean that you all of a sudden begin personal attacks on her. Make it about the issue. You'll have to work out the ramifications of whatever he or she has done. That doesn't absolve them of that, but making it personal just doesn't get you anywhere, right? Because chances are you'll forgive her for what she's done, but she's not going to forget the name calling, nor should she.
And you know what else, Kyle? I'm going to say something else. And if she or he's been doing something and you feel like you need to say, or you feel that, yes, they always do that, then how do I say this nicely? Yes, you need to bring it to their attention, but you also have to think about why you've never said anything before now.
Sure.
If it happens all the time.
Absolutely. So leave the name calling out of it, right?
Yep.
Never make it personal, right?
Right.
Take a break. I think that's elementary. We all know that, right? And the practical advice I would give is just I'm never going to use the words you never, you don't. I'm just not going to do that. I'm going to leave it out of my vocabulary completely. And I will promise you, if you do that, it's not going to make your relationship rainbows and butterflies. You will see, though, an improvement in your communication, and you will find the other person is going to be a little less defensive when you have some sort of conflict, and a little more open to talking about it.
And it will, you know what? And you know what I found? I agree with you that it also made me a little bit more specific. It allowed me to, just having to think about it and think of another way to say that made me a little bit more specific and less kind of global about, him. So it did also help the getting personal part.
Absolutely. When you have, if I'm going to not, when you think about, okay, put yourself in a position where you're mad at Drew and you're angry and you know that he's done something, right? And the first thing you want to do is lash out at him with these absolutes of, Drew, you never. If you're going to make the statement, I'm not going to say you never. That completely changes the dynamics of that conversation.
Correct. Yep. So
it changed it entirely.
Yep. It's a pattern change, and it's an excellent one. And I hope that when we title this, we got to put this right in there. Never say you never or you don't.
That's perfect. I'll go with that. Laura, have fun in Vegas. Hope you sleep well. Have a safe trip home. Don't do anything crazy. And that thing about what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, it's a total lie.
Total lie.
Take care. We'll see you next week. Bye.